welcome. You're watching NewsX and I'm Megha Sharma. This is VaKu and the special edition where India celebrates 75 years of independence and how its relationship with the rest of the world has built up in the last 75 years. What is going to be the future roadmap, particularly when it comes to the European Union. I'm at the delegation of the European Union in New Delhi. With me is the ambassador of the European Union to India and Bhutan, His Excellency Ugo Astuto. It's fantastic to have you on the broadcast with us, sir.
Thank you for inviting.
My first question to you is obviously with regards to the 60 years of diplomacy and bilateral ties that the European Union and India have shared. How do you look back and reminisce about all that has happened in the course of these 6 decades?
Yes, as you say, this year we are celebrating 60 years of diplomatic relations. It's a propitious occasion to stop and look back. And I think we can take reasonable satisfaction from the development of this strategic partnership. Clearly, 60 years is a long while. The European Union has changed beyond recognition, and so has India. 60 years ago, the European Union had 6 member states focusing on steel, coal, a common agricultural policy. Today we have 27 member states, and it's an experience of regional integration which goes well beyond any other example currently existing. We basically have a region which is integrating under practically all respects, from the economy to the political setting to the social setting and people to people. And India has changed remarkably over these 60 years, and we have just read about the GDP of India reaching the ranking of the 5th largest world economy, a very significant achievement indeed. So over the years, our strategic relationship has also grown, and I think particularly the past 4 to 5 years have been very remarkable. I think these last 4 to 5 years have been marked by the clear political determination of the Indian and of the European Union leadership to achieve a step change in our relationship. What we see now is a relationship not just based on economic relations, which still are important, but also expanding to political relations, to people context, and to looking together at solutions for global challenges, climate change, the digital transition. We are living in a dangerous world. We see multilateralism now putting into doubt, and clearly to like-minded democracies like India and the European Union sharing values and sharing the same outlook in terms of open society. I think we can work together also for the global good.
Yeah, you've spoken specifically about sustainability, climate change. COP27 is being envisaged by the entire world. And I'm going to specifically speak about the charter that has been rolled out in the previous COP26. There was a lot of contrasting views when it came to the Asian nations, particularly India and China, versus the rest of the world, which was led by the United States of America and European Union as well. Now, the big point of discussion was phasing out of the coal utilization as a fossil fuel versus completely removing it from the ecosystem of particularly the Asian nations, which had been a massive concern for the West, for the United States of America. Now that there have been these modifications made, what should be the lookout for COP27, and how should EU work in tandem with India in being able to provide the ecosystem for sustainability and for having renewable energy as the primary source of energy for all consumption purposes in India?
Yes, well, I think the marking feature of COP26 was the fact that the international community came together and clearly acknowledged the fact that we do not any longer have the luxury of simply waiting. And India and the European Union in particular, I believe we start from the same proposition that we need to act now and we need to be ambitious, because the science tells us that we have a relatively short window of opportunity. The IPCC report has sounded another clarion call that climate change is with us. We see extreme weather events, be it in South Asia or Europe. We see the rising sea levels. it's a moment when we all need to come together and find a solution. In terms of mitigation of the reduction of the emission of toxic gases, and in terms of adaptation, because some of these changes are irreversible, unfortunately. So we will have to adapt, and we will have to help those who are most affected by these changes. Clearly, those most affected are very often the most vulnerable, be it in Europe or be it in the south of the world. The example of the small island developed states clearly comes to mind. So there is a need for a global endeavor, and I think India, the European Union can be leaders in that. And I clearly see that. I mean, that the Prime Minister Modi at the last COP26 presented very ambitious goals for India in terms of India becoming carbon neutral in 2070, and in terms of massive investment in solar and renewables. And we as European Union, we are also trying to change the very paradigm of our economy, the Green Deal. I'm sure you are familiar with the expression. So what we want to do is to achieve growth through the protection of the environment, and not at the expense of the environment, as it happened all too often in the past, unfortunately. So COP27 is another opportunity now to set for ourselves targets such as to achieve the commitments taken in Paris. We must not allow an increase in world temperature beyond 1.5 Celsius degrees. Otherwise, this would have very serious consequences, and it would be a catastrophe. So we need to act. It's a responsibility we have vis-à-vis the next generation. And again, let me repeat, I think India and the European Union are well placed to shape the agenda in this direction.
Now, there are a lot of the European Union member nations that have been having these bilateral trade talks and agreements and MOUs that are being signed in individual capacity as well. And that's heartening to understand when it comes to the green hydrogen initiative that's taking place in Norway. Talk about Denmark, and EU itself has come up with a green pact with India. There have been summits that have been held subsequently after COP26, and that's a good forward-looking initiative. If you could specifically mention to me the timelines that may have been decided to allow for these joint ventures to take place and have the R&D and the solutions targeted approaches that have already been established in EU countries to then come offshore, come to India, set up bases and allow for a healthy collaboration in then making India perhaps a region via which not just manufacturing takes place, but also exports in terms of green energy?
Well, I think we are mainstreaming climate action in all of our activities, in our strategic partnership with India. I'm sure you are aware that the Commissioner for Energy, Simpson, recently visited Delhi. She had several meetings with her counterparts at ministerial level, but she also had two public events, one on solar and another on hydrogen.
Yes.
And I think it's significant she focused on these two sectors, particularly promising in our cooperation with India. Solar, India is a champion in terms of the very rapid and effective rollout of solar all over the country. And on hydrogen, I think we agree, India and the European Union, that it's a great opportunity, particularly when it comes to the decarbonization of some sectors of industry which are particularly polluting, the hard-to-abate sectors such as steel and cement. And it's a fact that if India and the European Union manage to develop new technologies and implement these technologies, I think we are going to have also, our industry is going to have a competitive edge, which will also be particularly important in terms of economic opportunities. So what I see is a clear intention from both sides, from the European Union and India, to proceed in this direction in rolling out green technology and in progressively changing the fabric of our economic structure. We need to abandon unsustainable production and consumption patterns, and we need to adopt a greener approach, starting with energy. A greener energy mix is absolutely key if we want to achieve our targets in terms of cutting emissions.
I'm going to switch my focus to the free trade agreement that has been a highlight for some years now. In 2021, the progress towards this was renewed. How should India and EU now look at a roadmap for rapid escalation for signing of the formal deal? Are there any complexities that still weigh for both the nations, for EU as well as India? And if those hiccups could be resolved and streamlined in the future?
Well, of course there are complexities. These agreements are by definition complex because they are broad. We want an ambitious, comprehensive and balanced agreement. But what I would focus on now is the clear political commitment, both on the Indian and on the EU side. Our political leadership has given a clear direction about the need to resume the negotiation on the free trade agreement, on an investment on the agreement on the protection of investment, as well as an agreement on geographical indication. And we have had the first round already in Delhi, not so long ago. So it was June. The second round is imminent. It will be in Brussels at the beginning of October, and then probably another round is foreseeable before the end of the year. So what this means is there is a commitment, engagement, discussions need to be thorough. There will be complex issues to solve, but as a spirit, we have the positive spirit which is necessary to solve these problems.
The free trade agreement has already been signed with Australia very recently, some other nations as well. United Kingdom has been forthright in wanting to sign it before Diwali 2022, with the change of guard that has happened in the new Prime Minister that the United Kingdom has. Is there already a roadmap and a designated time that has been expected or envisaged by European Union and India? You said there have been a number of these meetings that have happened successively in the last few months.
Well, look, the ambition would be to try to define a package before the end of 2023. But clearly, what we need to do now is to focus on the talks, focus on the negotiations.
Okay, all right. My next question is going to be about the much touted global gateways that have to be also sustainable, while the world, and particularly EU and India, in combining their forces, fights out the challenges that are put forth by the Chinese BRI. What's the timeline to complete this humongous task? How can connectivity allow for EU member nations and India to come closer in terms of then building smoother supply chains, logistical chains, and then increased investment from both sides?
Right. Well, the Global Gateway is a major political initiative taken by the President of the Commission not so long ago. And with India specifically, we also have a partnership, a connectivity partnership. The point is that we share the same principles, which we believe should underpin the development of infrastructure. Infrastructure must be sustainable. And by sustainable, I mean environmentally sustainable. We have just discussed that, but also socially sustainable, because it must respond to the actual needs of the communities, and it must not impose an unbearable burden over public finances. And then it needs to be inclusive, in the sense that obviously the whole community should benefit from it. And it should be transparent, in the sense that the procurement, the whole process of adjudication should be open to all, with clear standards and with clear criteria and adequate standards. So this is a vision which brings together India and the European Union. And based on this principle, I believe that there is much scope for looking on how to work together on infrastructure in the region, in South Asia and beyond. So the conversation is open. It's not that we are starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Let me mention, for instance, the European Investment Bank, the EU Bank, which has been working in India now for more than a decade. And if you look at a number of projects in terms of metro systems in India and several Indian urban centers, you will see also the footprint of the European Investment Bank participating in the investment and in the development. This is just one example. There will be others. I think the conditions are set for India and the European Union to look together at possible projects in the region in order to foster connectivity based on the principles I underlined earlier.
So besides India, which are the other Asian nations or South American or North American nations that may then be later on be synchronized in this partnership of the global gateways?
Well, look, Global Gateway is a global initiative. So we are looking at all our partners. With Latin America, we have already put in place, for instance, a major initiative when it comes to digital connectivity with a cable connecting Europe to Latin America. Africa is our immediate neighborhood. So we are already working extensively with our African partners to see where we can chip in and help in the development of needed infrastructure. South Asia, we are very eager to discuss with India also to see where we can help foster regional connectivity with India's neighbors for the common good.
Okay, all right. Are there any challenges that the EU nations and European Union and the European Commission would like to ease out in terms of the creases, whether it's ease of doing business or bureaucracy or logistic issues that they might face in coming up with signing these strategic deals and then allowing for implementation to also take place within India?
Well, of course there are. And I suspect if you ask the same question to an Indian colleague of mine, he will tell you the same. He will tell you about the problems faced by Indian companies investing in Europe. And we do have problems for EU companies investing in India. There are at times issues of national standards. There are at times issues about changing legislation, but this is normal. So what we need to have is a platform to discuss and to solve these issues. And I'm pretty positive that the conversation which is ongoing on the free trade agreement will also allow to touch and to solve these market access issues on the one side and the other.
Okay, all right. Now I'm going to also brush upon the very sensitive subject that has shaken up the entire geopolitical ecosystem of the world, which is the Ukraine-Russia standoff that continues unabated despite calls by global economies to stop the war. How has European Union particularly seen India's stance successively, whether at the UNGA or the UNSC, and the resolutions that have been India has been participating in or removing itself from?
Look, you have referred to an Ukraine-Russia standoff. Actually, it's a Russian war. It's a war of aggression against a peaceful neighbor, and it's a blatant violation of the UN Charter. And following that, we have also seen indiscriminate shelling of civilians, and we see mounting evidence of war crimes against civilians, against the civilian population. In Bucha first, now the investigation conducted in other liberated territories unfortunately brings the same. And over the past few days, you have also seen very troubling declaration coming from the Russian leadership, including about innuendos on the use of nuclear power. So what we need to do is to stop the aggression. We need hostilities to stop. We need Russia to withdraw without conditions. That's why the European Union has been supporting Ukraine since February, since the start of the aggression. We have been supporting Ukraine financially, politically, and we have been imposing sanctions on Russia. The purpose of the sanction is about affecting the war machine of Russia so that it cannot continue its aggression. On the international plan, what we have been trying to do at the UN and elsewhere is to make the case for the international community to come together and defend the UN Charter. And what we see is a progressive and increasing isolation of Russia also on the political scene. So we see Russia failing militarily, and we also see Russia failing politically in the sense that it's more and more accepted worldwide that this is indeed an aggression and it needs to stop now. And we were obviously particularly encouraged to hear the very clear words pronounced by the Prime Minister Modi in Uzbekistan, where he said this is not the time for war, and evoking democracy and dialogue. Mm-hmm. And the same at the UN General Assembly with Dr. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister. So it's a situation where we see a permanent member of the UN Security Council trampling on the very principle of the UN Charter. It cannot go scot-free.
Okay. You spoke particularly about these sanctions that have been imposed by several countries, including the EU nations, against Russia. But has it worked in favor of the world and particularly EU nations? Or has it worked in favor of Russia, which has been freewheeling and allowing for its fertilizers and food as well as oil to be distributed across nations that are willing to procure it at lower rates and with a transaction that has strengthened the ruble?
Look, President Putin is failing militarily on the field, and it is also failing in its economic strategy. What we see is a major crisis, socially and economically, in Russia today. I think there is a very significant evidence, most recently, after the order mobilization, almost 200,000 Russians have been fleeing abroad. So the borders with Georgia, with Kazakhstan, you see a line of people who simply do not recognize or do not want to fight this war because they feel that it's an unwarranted, unjustified, and unprovoked war. I think you couldn't find a better evidence of the fact that this is actually the war of President Putin alone. And what we need is, again, a cessation of hostility. We need the withdrawal of Russia from the occupied territories without preconditions.
Okay, so while there are security concerns for NATO and the rest of the world, particularly Europe and America, against Russia, there are similar concerns that have been raised by India when it comes to the Chinese expansionist policy. Whether it is the subcontinent, it touches upon Sri Lanka or Nepal or Pakistan, or even trying to envisage its way into Bangladesh or even some African nations, bringing the security and safety of the borders of India under jeopardy. How can EU and India work in tandem to allow for a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific amidst this aggressive nature of the Chinese?
Well, look, we have a complex relationship with China. We usually sum up in three words: a partner, a competitor, and a rival. A rival in terms of systemic rival, because the system of governance is clearly different and alternative. A partner, because we have to discuss with China global challenges such as climate change, because without China it will be difficult to find a solution. And a competitor in other aspects, in trade respect and so on, where we need to ensure that China plays by the same rule as the rest of the world. When it comes to the Indo-Pacific, I mean, our vision of the Indo-Pacific, just like the vision of India of the Indo-Pacific, is not against anyone. It's about upholding principles. And you just mentioned this, a rules-based system of international governance, respect for international law, including the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So this is not a vision against anyone, but it's a vision to promote a stable, prosperous, and democratic future for the region. And we have already started working together. I think we can do more by supporting this vision in all international fora and making it happen in the Indo-Pacific at large, together with partners. And there are many.
There is also creation of these new blocks, or at least an initiation towards creating these blocks. When I talk about the I2U2 that has taken place, that has included United States of America, Israel, India, UAE, and that's at this point of time particularly a bloc that is involving itself in the economic ties amongst all these four nations. Similarly, with the distancing of Russia from NATO and the rest of Europe has allowed it to come closer to China and nations that are aligned to China, including Iran, including Turkey, and other nations in the vicinity. Are you seeing a clear-cut multipolarity in terms of these new blocs that are being built post-COVID and since the Ukraine standoff has been initiated? And how should EU and India work together in building or initiating blocs, the likes of Quad, the likes of AUKUS that have happened, is there a prospect of moving in that direction, and would it be advantageous?
Look, I think we are living in a dangerous world and erratic. And the reason for this risk and for this unpredictable situation is largely because multilateralism has been put into question. And what is at the root of multilateralism is the respect for the UN Charter. I think it's in the common interest of India, the European Union, and beyond to return to the values and principles of the UN Charter, which are underpinned by respect for international law, a rules-based system of international governance. And I think all the countries who recognize themselves in this principle should work together to uphold them. For the international community to return to the path of stability and peace, these principles are indispensable.
Okay, and a follow-up question to that. Does, by any stretch of the imagination, the dealings that India has with Russia, particularly when it comes to oil, defense, commodities, unnerve European Union? Have there already been discussions, as you said, in terms of meetings that have taken place in the past for agreements to be held when it comes to strategic partnerships, free trade agreements, and you talk about how the collaboration when it comes to technology and R&D that could be then brought forth into the Indian shores might or might not be impacted by the geopolitical decisions that India makes towards whichever nation?
Well, look, India is a friend and a strategic partner. We respect its decision, its positions. I also believe the situation in the ground is changing. And what we keep telling to all our partners, we have a shared interest in stopping this aggression. The international community needs to come together and make it clear that the UN Charter is at the foundation of peace and prosperity.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Ugo Astuto, for joining me on this telecast. And here's hoping for 75 years of more burgeoning relations between the European Union and India. And not just 75 years, many, many more. And on that note, I'll take your leave. And here's hoping to having you on the telecast on NewsX more often in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.